Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the most absolutely fascinating transformations in modern history. We're going to look at how China literally took a stagnant, closed-off economy and turned it into a global powerhouse. And the crazy thing, they did it using a very specific, highly controlled method, basically experimental laboratories. We know them today as Special Economic Zones, or SEZs. It poses a massive question, right? How do you actually transform an entire nation's economy almost overnight without risking total collapse? Well, back in the late 1970s, China's economy was essentially at a standstill. But then, in 1979, the government rolls out this groundbreaking reform and open door policy. Instead of changing the rules for the whole country all at once, which would be incredibly risky, they decided to test drive market-oriented capitalist principles in tightly controlled, isolated little pockets. Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll start with the grand economic experiment, trace the rise of the powerhouses, confront the price of progress, uncover how China is pioneering the green transition, and finally, look at the challenges in the new era. Part 1. The grand economic experiment, testing market reforms. Now, to really wrap our heads around this, we've got to look at the geography. Back in 1980, under the leadership of Deng Xiaoping, who, fun fact, was actually inspired by a similar project in Ireland called the Shannon Free Zone, China strategically set up its first 4 SEZs. We're talking Shenzhen, Zhuhai, Shantou, and Xiamen. Take a look at their locations, right along that southeastern coast. I mean, this was no accident. These spots were deliberately placed far away from the political center up in Beijing to kind of minimize interference and risk, but, and this is key, they were incredibly close to capitalist hubs like Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan. They were essentially designed to act as windows to the outside world, testing grounds to see if things like foreign investment, tax incentives, and flexible labor contracts could actually work inside China. Moving on to Part 2, Rise of the Powerhouses, the Boom and Divergence. Now, what's really wild about this is the sheer concentration of capital. Just look at this. In 1981, literally just 1 year after these zones were set up, nearly 60% of all foreign direct investment entering the entire massive country of China went straight into just these 4 tiny coastal testbeds. Almost 60%. It's wild. That combination of cheap labor, flexible policies, and being right on global shipping routes, it acted like a giant magnet for international money. In fact, production and exports from these early zones skyrocketed by over 40,000% over the next few decades. Just a total boom. But success wasn't just handed to you because you got the SEZ label. If we compare Shenzhen and Shantou, we see this really fascinating divergence. Shenzhen totally leveraged its immediate border with Hong Kong. They pulled in management know-how and eventually pivoted heavily toward innovation, becoming the absolute global powerhouse we know today. Shantou, on the other hand, well, despite having those exact same initial privileges, it really struggled. They relied on low-value manufacturing, and they had these issues with administrative fragmentation that really bogged them down. So what's the takeaway? It proves that an SEZ success relies heavily on adaptive policy frameworks, really smart strategic planning, and of course, continuous investment in human capital. Which brings us to Part 3, the price of progress, the environmental cost. Because, as you might guess, all of this rapid, explosive industrialization came with a very steep, very dark price tag. The scale of the pollution issue was just monumental. By 2006, China had become the world's single largest greenhouse gas emitter, and the industrial sector, that accounted for a staggering 72% of the country's carbon emissions. 72%. And here is the real kicker. Those special economic zones and industrial parks we just talked about, they were accountable for half of those industrial emissions. So these zones were the engines of China's economy, sure, but they were also the primary engines of its pollution. And the human and economic toll here was absolutely devastating. In 2010 alone, severe pollution cost China an estimated $227 billion. To put that into perspective, that was roughly 3.5% of its entire national GDP at the time. But way beyond the money, the human cost was just tragic. Air pollution was contributing to an estimated 1.6 million deaths every single year. Plus, with rising labor costs and severely depleted resources, China's whole cheap manufacturing model was rapidly losing its global cost competitiveness. The government realized pretty quickly that this model absolutely had to change. So let's move to Part 4, Pioneering the Green Transition, a new mission. To fix this massive crisis, the Chinese government decided to use the exact same tool that caused the problem in the first place. They took these SEZ laboratories and completely repurposed them to test out environmental solutions. A huge piece of this new national development strategy was adopting what's called the circular economy. Now, if you're not familiar, this is basically an alternative economic model that completely ditches the old take, make, dispose system. Instead, it's all about resource efficiency and those classic 3R principles: reduce, reuse, and recycle. The central government took this concept and wove it deeply into their official 5-year plans. That sent a loud, clear, high-visibility signal to everyone. Green industrial transition is the new top priority. And the way they rolled out these green test beds was super structured. It really evolved year after year. It kicked off in 2003 with the Eco-Industrial Park program, which mostly focused on clean production. Then, by 2005, you have the Circular Economy Demonstration Program, and that started tackling broader sustainable urban development. Fast forward to 2012, and this gets upgraded to the Circular Transformation Program to start meeting global climate change commitments. And finally, in 2013, they launched the Low Carbon Industrial Park program. That one put a massive emphasis on strict carbon monitoring and building up renewable infrastructure. So they essentially layered these initiatives, building up a much more complex, robust green framework over time. Now, the collective benefits we're seeing from these initiatives are honestly incredibly substantial. The SEZs participating in these programs are seeing vastly reduced toxic discharges into the water and soil, massive increases in resource recycling, and significantly lower greenhouse gas emissions. But, and this is crucial from an economic standpoint, it's also stimulating the creation of high-value green jobs. This transition is actively giving China a brand new competitive position in the global market. They are pivoting away from just cheap manufacturing and moving straight into high-tech green industries. To really picture what this looks like on the ground, let's check out the city of Baoding. This is a great example. Baoding used to have an industrial zone that was so heavily polluted, it literally killed off thousands of fish in a nearby lake. Just a total mess. But spurred by these new green SEZ initiatives, the local government pivoted hard. They transformed the whole area into a clean technology hub. In fact, today, Baoding is known as the Electric Valley. It became home to 170 clean power companies, and get this, they generated 45 billion RMB in revenue by 2010. With 90% of Baoding's traffic lights now being solar-powered, they quite literally turned an environmental disaster zone into a thriving green tech capital. And that brings us to our final section, Part 5, Challenges in the New Era, the Future of SEZs. Because while the green pivot is definitely working and yielding amazing results, this whole top-down laboratory model still faces some very real modern hurdles. So the crucial point here is that if they want to sustain this success, a few key steps absolutely have to happen. First up, there are overlapping mandates. With so many different green programs being managed by totally different government ministries, there's kind of this lack of clear coordination. It gets messy. Second, local governments desperately need better technical capacity for monitoring and accounting for their greenhouse gas emissions. I mean, you can't manage what you can't accurately measure, right? And third, these zones have to keep moving up the global value chain. They really need to leave that low-cost manufacturing mentality in the past and firmly establish themselves in knowledge-based, high-tech sectors. Now, you might look at this statistic that roughly 13% of China's 1,568 special zones participate in these official green programs and think, well, that's kind of low. But it is vital to realize that this 13% includes almost all of the major state-level economic zones. Because these are the absolute largest industrial hubs in the country, their participation actually has a disproportionately massive positive impact on the nation's entire economic and environmental trajectory. So let's zoom out for a second. Since their inception back in 1980, China's special economic zones have proven to be these essential experimental laboratories. They fundamentally transformed an entire nation into a global economic powerhouse. They drove that massive initial industrial boom. And now? Now they're pioneering the green transition. As we look at the immense pressure that climate change is putting on developing nations today, it really leaves us with a provocative final thought. Is this localized testbed method of adaptive policy the ultimate blueprint for our global green future? Can other emerging economies use this exact same framework to balance rapid economic growth with environmental survival? It's a massive question, and you can bet the whole world will be watching closely. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the data.